All right, welcome. We are live from our wonderful studios in New Haven with one of our wonderful New Haven panels for the nose. We'll be talking about two movies today with Tom Breen, a film critic and reporter for the New Haven Independent and host of WNHH Radio's Deep Focus, which is a great movie program in its own right. Lucy Gelman is editor of The Arts Paper and host of WNHH Radio's Kitchen Sink, SYNC. Pedro Soto, very fittingly for today, is an aerospace executive working on a secret project, which we believe does involve antimatter. And really, you know what? Say no to antimatter, kids. Don't. If someone offers you antimatter at a party or something like that, don't take it. Don't. You know what? You don't do it. Don't do antimatter. It's not good for you. All right. So we're going to begin with the movie Ad Astra, which much to the annoyance of everybody around me, especially my significant other, have been referring to as Ed Asner. So we'll be starting with that a little later on. We've also all been to the Downton Abbey movie. It probably has a name, right? Downton Abbey, the movie? What is it called?
I think it's just Downton Abbey.
Downton Abbey, okay. Yeah. So we'll be talking about that as well. So, but let's begin with Ed Asner, and we're going to hear a little clip from the movie. Obviously, this is mainly a vehicle for Brad Pitt. I mean, he's kind of the only consistent character all the way through the movie, and he plays Roy McBride. He's talking to Lieutenant General Rivas, played by John Ortiz, and John Finn is Brigadier General. You don't care who he's talking to. Just hear this, listen to this clip, and try not to think of it as exposition.
Major, what can you tell us about the Lima project?
First manned expedition to the outer solar system, sir. Some 29 years ago.
And the commander was?
It was my father, sir. The ship disappeared approximately 16 years into the mission. No data was ever recovered. Deep space missions were halted after that.
Roy, we have something that might come as quite a shock to you. We believe your father is still alive near Neptune.
My father's alive, sir?
We believe so.
Roy, the surge seems to be the result of some kind of antimatter reaction. Now, the Lima project was powered by that material, and your father was in charge of it. Now, we're talking about a potentially unstoppable chain reaction here. The uncontrolled release of antimatter could ultimately threaten the stability of our entire solar system. All life could be destroyed.
And it's not in this part of the clip, but right at the end of that, all the three actors turn to face the audience and say, "Did you get all that? Because it's really important." All right, like it's pretty much the basis of the whole movie. So yes, and we should say that Brad Pitt's Roy McBride's father, Clifford McBride, is played by Tommy Lee Jones. Probably the worst divorced dad ever. Moves to someplace near Neptune, which is like really helpful if you're trying to get in touch with your dad. Well, I'm somewhere near Neptune. So anyway, let's talk to the panel a bit about Ad Astra. We should say that this past weekend, both of these movies, Downton Abbey and Ad Astra, debuted. Downton Abbey surprised everybody, I think, by how well it did. It was the #1 box office movie by a long shot of the weekend. I don't know. Who should we start with? Who wants to go first? Tom, get us rolling here.
So, yeah, I will happily go first. And I think that based on the email thread before we started the show, I may have liked this movie the most. And going back to that clip that you liked with Colin, I actually have no problem with that particular exposition, as clunky seeming as it may be, because I think it fits into a larger pattern that director James Gray is going for, and a history of narrative art that follows this hero's journey trajectory that he's interested in playing with. I mean, there are so many parallels to Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now in this movie. And I think that, what you just played is the Harrison Ford sequence at the beginning of that movie, where someone tells Martin Sheen's character that, there's someone upriver who has a lot of political power and it's gone completely off the deep end. And you're closely, connected to him, and you've got to go up and find him as he's doing all of this crazy stuff. And it is the main kind of motivating factor for the plot, but ultimately it's kind of irrelevant to the the various kind of trials and tribulations that this hero experiences over the course of the movie, the way that the world is fleshed out at each step along the way, and then the kind of psychological winnowing until the audience is just inside of the head. Almost every character becomes completely peripheral, almost an idea in comparison to, what we see and what we feel and what we experience through the main character, this astronaut who, very broadly speaking, has been traumatized by the loss of his dad, who this incredibly accomplished astronaut, who he then realizes may be up to some serious no good. And I think that journey is incredibly rewarding and thought-provoking and filled with immense solitude, which is something that is kind of audacious for a movie to tackle, because solitude can be boring, but it's also an important part, I think, of what the director is trying to explore.
All right. So I just want to, before we go around the rest of the table here, say that one of the interesting things about these two domovies is, this is a very male movie with only, as Lucy is about to tell you, male characters who speak or mean anything. Downton Abbey has like this enormous female audience, and like I think any showing you go to, it's like 4 or 5 to 1 women to men. So it's kind of interesting. I don't think we planned it, but it's interesting pairing here. So Lucy, give us your main hot take on Ad Astra.
I just could not with this movie. This was the movie about Brad Pitt being a sad man in space. I think going into the movie, Gray was like, okay, it's go time. I need to make a movie about toxic masculinity, about how insular space travel is, about father-son relationships that are hard, and I'm also going to tie in a chase on the moon and an overwrought metaphor about climate change and make it work. And that's what he did. And if that's the kind of movie that you're interested in seeing, then this movie is an excellent movie for you. The production value is extremely high. Oh, and by the way, I think he also thought it would be really great to put in some very attractive women with no speaking roles or minimal speaking roles, as long as they were dressed in like cool clothing. And he was like, okay, that's fine, including a love interest who has maybe 2 words and a recorded phone message in the whole thing. So this was not the piece for me. I saw it in a theater where there was one other person, and I think that person was much more into the movie. I just had trouble with it. There's also a monkey in space. And I just, as someone who really struggles to suspend their disbelief, even when I go to the movies and even when the movies are asking me to do this, it was not the movie for me. But if you want to see a movie about a sad man in space who is still attractive, knock yourself out.
I just want to say, first of all, I'm being told that it's a baboon, it's a baboon.
A baboon.
Also, a little memory of The Right Stuff. In The Right Stuff, one of the ways that they try to, one of the reasons that the pilots don't want to not have control, and this is apparently based on Tom Wolfe's reporting, people keep telling them that a monkey is going to make the first flight, and that's very upsetting to them, the idea that the monkey is going to do a job that they will eventually be asked to do. All right, so Pedro, your hot take, please.
So I loved it in terms of in terms of the cinematography, the soundtrack, the acting, all the the individual components of the movie. I found I was attracted to. As it didn't feel like something that was particularly fresh or relevant. It did feel like callbacks to a lot of other movies, but it was something that I was like, well, maybe Brad Pitt should have been, played. It should have been a female character, going to see her mother. That would have been at least a different take on what we ended up with, which was yes, hero's journey. Sad man going to see his dad. Dad's not who he thought he was. Yay. We know that already. It was done very well, so I liked watching it. But at the end of the day, I was like, okay, yep, that's about, where that would go. And
I do, if I can interject, I want to say, masculinity, and specifically toxic masculinity, is something that I really do want to see probed more in pop culture. I'm really interested in that. But this was not the work that did that. And if it was trying, it really failed on that.
Well, yeah, I don't think it was... and it was like repressed masculinity.
Yes.
It was just the shell that you wear instead of how that affects everyone around you. Yes, did it affect Liv Tyler because she went away? Yes, but the effects of what he did really weren't that apparent.
So I don't know if anyone read the Nathan Heller profile of James Gray in the New Yorker recently, but staff writer Nathan Heller wrote this pretty lengthy article about James Gray, about him growing up in Brooklyn and the various movies he's made, including The Lost City of Z and The Immigrant and a few other kind of Brooklyn crime movies. And the main thrust of the article is that James Gray is a classicist. He's someone very interested in the kind of mythologies, that these very simple narratives that are told over and over and over again, and then kind of perfecting a form to communicate, even if it's not something completely novel. I think it's something he's trying to get at that is true. And I think that there's a single image that sticks out to me, especially from Lost City of Z, The Immigrant, and this that almost that hit me so at the core as a kind of universal kind of truth and sadness. And this one I'll try to describe very briefly, which is when Brad Pitt, this astronaut Roy McBride, is on his way to Mars because it's where he can communicate with his long-lost father, send a message out into space where he may be in Neptune. And the pilot of the ship kind of stops the ship to take a look at a smaller vessel that's sending out an SOS message. And Brad Pitt and this pilot kind of go out to the ship to see what kind of distress they might be in. And if anyone remembers, there is maybe 2 or 3 shots of Brad Pitt with his visor down in his helmet, looking at the spacecraft door as it opens, and all we see is this big hole reflected in Brad Pitt's face. It is realistic in the context of the movie in that he's looking at something, he has this reflective visor on, and it's just showing what he's looking at. But I found the depth and incredible power of that image of just this nothingness, this incredibly accomplished astronaut who believes in the progress and science and all this stuff, but this hole at the center of the sky that is going to be, filled maybe by the long-lost father, or ultimately, don't hold your breath for that. But there's something that Gray is capable of finding and producing these images that encapsulate everything about a character, everything we've seen before and after, in a single shot. And I find that something that not any filmmaker can do. And
yeah, I think
I'm amazed that we're doing this show without Mercy Quay. This is just dawned on me.
I know.
Mercy Quay, the most
if you're in the area.
Pedro's working on an outer space secret project, so obviously he's qualified, but the outer space stan of the greater New Haven area is not with us right now, although we have access to her, so that's like weird all by itself. One of the things, it's interesting that he says that, and I saw Lost City of Z, which I thought was okay but not all that memorable, and it's interesting that Tom says that thing about him being a classicist, because one of the things that I did like about this movie, which I mostly found kind of boring and didn't really reach me very much, but the voiceover is really good. And once again, there's a little bit of a callback, I think, to Apocalypse Now, but also kind of a callback, I thought, to the old science fiction stories. There's something about the VO over the music that, reminded me of the kind of Arthur C. Clarke, Samuel Delaney kind of story that you'd read in one of those old science fiction magazines, right? There's like this guy talking. Also a little bit of Blade Runner going on there too.
Yes.
But I love the VO though.
And there's something pulpy about it too. There's a car chase on the moon over a fight over extraction of resources in this highly commodified kind of moon tourist center. There's something.
The Applebee's,
right? It's not just tendentious.
Right.
There's some action scenes too.
Right.
Actually, the moon chase was in and of itself. I was like, that would be a pretty cool movie. Like, who are these pirates? Where are they staying? Where is their base? Like,
see, if that had been an Oscar-nominated animated short, this would have been great.
Pirates on some vehicles, monkeys on the other ones.
And the monkeys. Yeah. Well, and the shot when there's a shot when they finally reach the dark side of the moon, and now they kind of spin into it. And again, like, I was just like, that's just gorgeous. That's and seeing Neptune, when you finally see it. Sorry, spoiler. You see Neptune. It just it's like barely there. You can hardly see it. And yeah, there is. Now that you're mentioning that he's a classicist and kind of the construction of shots and the care that he took, I might want to see it again and just kind of see it in that lens.
I feel like we are going through a Brad Pitt renaissance right now too. I was so into his performance in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood in Quentin Tarantino's most recent movie, and if Brad Pitt, for the majority of his career, going back to the early 90s, has always, I think, struggled in the role of the main protagonist just because of how big he plays his characters. Think of Fight Club being like the worst example. It's like, these are so exaggerated, so over the top, that are so reprehensible. There's so much manic energy. Here, he just strips it down to the bare bones. and it's just, the twitch of an eye communicates so much about the stoicism of this character, how much hurt there is, how much he wants to accomplish, and this, divide between himself and everyone around him, including Liv Tyler.
I am a big Brad Pitt fan these days, and I really did enjoy Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I think he's having a year in a lot of different ways. The interviews that he's been giving are thoughtful and very interesting. He's obviously, he's not just a pretty face. He also, one of the movies that we talked about this year that we got pretty excited about was The Last Black Man in San Francisco, which his production company kind of saw some work by these young guys at a festival and put up the money to actually do this. So he's kind of a force for good. I feel like 2019 may turn out to be the year of J-Lo and Brad Pitt, right? J-Lo's got Hustlers, the Super Bowl halftime show. We were just talking before we went on the air. She could do the Super Bowl halftime show and then win an Oscar like just a few weeks later. Nobody's ever done that. Brad Pitt's having the same kind of year. And I like him a lot in this. But, it's just not enough. I think I'm with Lucy that just watching him mull over things and talk. One of the devices of this movie is that he's constantly reassuring this computer mood assessor that he doesn't have any moods. And the one time that he actually admits that he does have moods, the computer stops trusting him. One of the things that Brad Pitt has learned how to do, his character, Roy, has learned how to do, is sort of the ultimate male trick, which is completely conceal your emotional life. I'm sure Lucy has something to say.
No, I want to go back to the VOs because I actually didn't find this movie convincing for a number of reasons. So, of course, Baboon in Space, Moon Chase on Mars, Chase on the Moon. Moon and Mars are different places. But anyway, I didn't find any of that. I found very little of the dialogue, actually, both internal and external, convincing. And when I read it, I was like, wow, there were just not judicious editors or no one with a vagina looked at this movie. Before it went to production. I really...
Actually, it says that in the credits. I don't know if you stayed for that, but there's just one line that says that.
I
exactly
did not.
That, yeah.
No, I left the minute the film was over, actually.
Well, so, I also do want to say, this movie has a big uphill climb with me. I don't like astronauts very much anyway. They are famously banned from the show. They're not allowed to be here as guests. I really don't like Liv Tyler. Her first movie was a movie called Heavy, which I really liked, but I basically don't like her. I think she's like the worst elf ever. The entire time in Lord of the Rings, she looks like she's waiting for a break so she can go have a cigarette. And so that was the fact that she's sort of, as Lucy says, she has almost no lines anyway, but she's the only identifiable person with a you-know-what in this movie. That didn't help me either. So, I just have to sort of factor all my prejudices against it. But I still don't think... Can I ask another question? What is Donald Sutherland doing in this movie? Donald Sutherland is in this movie for no reason whatsoever. He doesn't have too many scenes, and he says something about how he and Tommy Lee Jones had a big falling out, but I don't think he ever explains what that was. It was probably about whether to destroy the universe or not, which is a big dividing point among people. And then he's gone.
I think that his character is disposed of in a way that every other character who's introduced is in this movie, and that if this movie ultimately proves itself to really only be interested in the Brad Pitt character's experience of the world, his incredible psychological and professional and physical isolation, here we have another example of someone tangentially related to someone he cares about, his dad. He went to grad school with him and may have some understanding of what happened to him, but at the mere prospect of intimacy in this man's life, he's immediately discarded of, just like the woman on Mars who is the kind of station manager who also has a kind of tangential connection to something that his dad did. She's introduced and I think could have been a potentially very interesting character, but this movie isn't interested in fully fleshed out side characters. It's only interested in this one man at the center of it, and I totally understand why that will rub people the wrong way, but I think it's a very intentional decision. I don't think it's a half...
But I don't get why we should be interested in this guy who never basically tells us anything about himself.
But beyond that, there's a connection to the family and might provide some kind of insight about family. But no, he's gone because of the moon chase.
Right. So I don't know. Is this also a little bit of a throwback to sort of the Gary Cooper type, stolid, Western guy who doesn't say much and I'm
With the, I mean,
I wish we had sort of a streaming feed of Lucy's facial expressions.
with the anxiety, I mean, those types of movies did not, plumb the depths of the anxiety and insecurity of those characters.
Right,
I mean,
yeah.
when John Ford or when John Wayne, jumps out of the stagecoach, you're not thinking that this is a guy who has any kind of doubt about his ability
But
to do whatever he
did
wants to do.
this either? Like, I'm sorry.
totally.
No.
He goes crazy on
If- no.
a 3-month
If
trip
I
to
had
Neptune.
if I had read like a bad YA novel, and there are good YA novels, right? Like that is the level of internal dialogue in this. There was nothing that I could not have predicted. Like I wasted $9 going to this movie.
But I think being able to predict something in a movie that is interested in a very familiar narrative structure is fine. It's kind of expected, but it's how the director and the actors and all the other people involved, what kind of individual stamp they give to these familiar stories that I think is interesting to watch.
Do we think that there's any kind of it was suggested, I think, by maybe on the Slate Cultural Gabfest or something, that there's sort of a little run of these existential space movies, that it's The Martian, it's Gravity, it's First Man. There's like something going, there's a kind of movie that's being made right now that is a big star vehicle probably for one male actor, and also maybe a director like Cuarón or somebody like that kind of putting his footprint down on the dusty surface of some planet. Is that a thing? And if so, why do we think it's a thing?
Yeah, Interstellar.
Oh,
as
Interstellar!
Well.
I love.
Yeah.
Oh boy, I think I suppressed that one.
Solaris. I mean, I think it. I mean, it's a genre in and of itself. Going back to like the 2001, right, Space Odyssey, and there aren't that many of them. It's not like there's 2 or 3 of these a year. I love The Martian, so I read the book and I saw the movie, and that one. I'll just watch that over and over again.
Yeah, The Martian's kind of an outlier, right? It really kind of has a little bit more of a sense of humor. You really
Yeah.
get to know Matt Damon's character, and there's like all sorts of other people back on Earth, and the people who are
Right.
flying around and the thing. I think is John Ortiz on that thing too? Is he there? It's either him or
No, Donald Glover's in it.
Donald. Yeah. So, but anyway, there's like a lot of other people who are kind of enjoyable to watch too. It isn't quite as isolated as basically
Yeah.
Gravity is Sandra Bullock. Once George Clooney's out of the way, Gravity is just Sandra Bullock trying to get home. That's the kind of existential thing, and I think it is pretty much Ryan Gosling in First Man, right?
Oh yeah, and well, I'm glad that Pedro brings up 2001: A Space Odyssey, which made in 1967. I think that going back to at least 50 plus years ago, there are maybe 2 main ways that one can make a space movie. There's the Star Wars minimal introspection, maximal entertainment, and then there's looking at space as truly the this incredible unknowable frontier where people go to the very ends of to try to figure out who they are and all that stuff. And I think we may be in a moment of it now, but I don't think it's unique to the 2010s. I think that Stanley Kubrick and also Andrei Tarkovsky with Solaris were doing this 50 years ago too.
But I think people also. I mean, I don't think the genre will ever go out of style either. And this is where Mercy Quay really should be here. But there is such a deep interest in what's out there, and Pedro's nodding, of course. But of course there is. You look up at the night sky and you feel so incredibly small, and you feel like you don't know what's out there. And I think that question of is there intelligent life out there is really, really interesting. And that plus this beautiful sort of backdrop of the stars in the galaxy and the Milky Way. It does make for an interesting film, I think, in theory.
All right, we should probably take a break so we'll have lots of time to talk. Not just about Downton Abbey, but we're also going to explore that whole sort of TV to movies phenomenon. So that's coming up after the proverbial this.
All right, well, you know. I said giant steps upward we take, walking on the moon. Oh, I hope my legs don't break.
right, that is, of course, the theme music to Downton Abbey. I say, of course, but like all of these things, Downton Abbey has a select audience. It turns out to be a fairly large select audience, as we said before. $31 million opening weekend. Best ever for Focus Features, which tends not to do, for example, Marvel Comics Universe movies, but this maybe is their Marvel Comics Universe movie in the sense that you have a familiar set of characters, familiar to a certain group of people. People want to see them kind of do their thing, exercise their superpowers. Movies at 84% on the tomato meter, and the audience, that's the critics' score at Rotten Tomatoes. The audience score is 95%. People who go to this movie really like it. Just to kind of get you all in the mood for it, here. By the way, we figured out it is just called Downton Abbey. It's not called Downton Abby Fire Walk with Me or anything like that.
I thought it was Downtown Abbey.
Yeah, it's not Downtown Abbey. That's Hustlers. No, I decided it should be called Downton Abbey, God is a Monarchist, which is the line spoken by Lady Mary in this movie. All right, so here we have one of the things about Downton Abbey, one of the premises, very much like Upstairs, Downstairs. It is the story of nobility living a pretty cosseted but somehow stressful life upstairs. Downstairs, there are servants who are working very hard, but also trying to thread through their own ambitions and wants and needs. So this is all about a visit by the king. King George V is going to, king and queen are actually going to visit. They're going to stay at Downton Abbey, which is considered a lesser house on the English countryside, but they're going there anyway, and they're bringing with them their own snotty bunch of servants who are throwing shade on the beloved set of servants that we've come to know and care about. So let's hear a little bit of that.
So my maids and I will not be involved in the preparations?
You mean during the stay you'll be the butler and...
Excuse me, I am not a butler. I am the king's page of the back stairs.
So our staff has nothing to do?
I'm sure they can be useful.
But how can they eat and get dressed at Raby Castle if the chef and the valet and the maid are all here?
We have two of each. The principal valet and the principal dresser will arrive in advance of their majesties, who bring an equerry, a lady-in-waiting, 2 detectives and 2 chauffeurs. The other chef goes from Raby to Harwood, 4 footmen go with him, and the other 4 come here. Do you all understand me?
So that scene is, I think it's played for a certain amount of laughs, and it is fancy servants talking to only slightly less fancy servants about who's fancier. We should say that the room is a little bit divided here. I think Pedro and I are both pretty much in the Downton Abbey. We've seen the whole series and stuff like that. I'm not sure that Tom and Lucy have, so we'll sort of divide things out. Well, Lucy, why don't you go first?
Oh,
you don't have to.
No, I'm happy to. Nothing happened in this movie. I think I actually liked Ad Astra, whatever.
Ed Asner.
Yes, better than this. Nothing really happened, but I think it was also a hard movie to understand if one didn't have the context of every season of the show. So I have seen exactly 1 episode of the show, and I have a somewhat working knowledge of the show from my grandmother, who has an encyclopedic knowledge of Downton Abbey. However, I don't think, one thing that Pedro brought up was the stakes did not seem very high in this movie. And the 1 episode I have seen is where I think it's a holiday special from a couple of years ago, and the household gets struck by the Spanish flu, and some people die. Mm-hmm. And nothing happened. So I went into this movie thinking, like, okay, the stakes are going to be really high. There is an assassination attempt in this movie, and that's about as fast as your heart pounds.
Well, there also is the head butler, Thomas, who is gay, who gets arrested because you... at that time, and then for happen. Decades after that too, right. You could being gay was a criminal act, and it was a very scary environment.
But
it's resolved in about 5 minutes.
Yes. No, I would agree, and I think Pedro would too. That it's well, Pedro, go ahead. You can talk about the stakes here.
I mean, the interesting thing, like you said, the series, because it had to be a series and had to have drama and stuff to propel things forward. There, like you said, literally the entire history of the Spanish flu occurs in like 1 episode for Downton Abbey. There's World War I. There's characters who get tried for murder. There's 2 characters who get tried for murder that they didn't commit. There are a lot of things that happen. The interesting thing is when going into this movie, I was wondering if they were, this had a series finale. It ended on a very beautiful and hopeful note. And I was wondering, are they going to break the movie, break the Downton Abbey, happiness to kind of propel things forward, as sequels tend to do? And they didn't. They just started where they left off, and interestingly enough, end up with a movie that, because everyone is pretty much where they were, and we don't want them to decline from that, ends up with very, very low stakes and no drama. But like ultimate fan service, because again, if you've seen the characters and you've spent all these seasons, every little line and people talking, and it is just like a Marvel movie where you need to see enough of them to be able to kind of piece together what's actually happening on screen.
I disagree with that analogy, though, because I can go into a Marvel movie completely blind and really enjoy myself, and that was not the case with this movie.
Although, I mean, if Endgame was dependent on you having seen 22 movies. I mean,
I guess it's really Endgame versus the other ones. Yeah.
Tom?
Yeah, I would say my experience with this movie is very similar to my experience eating a pretty big bag of very salty and buttery popcorn while watching the movie while sitting next to Lucy, in that it started out with really giddy, excited, over-eager consumption of this junk food. And then my stomach kind of started to hurt, and then I didn't really feel too well. And then by the end of it, I was overcome by this just incredible lethargy where I just wanted it all to end so I could go to sleep. I actually did like this movie for the most part. I found it pretty charming, and I was pretty won over by a RogerEbert.com review that I shared with the group via email thread by Matt Zoller Seitz, who has written filmography books about Oliver Stone and about Wes Anderson. But he gave this movie a 3.5-star rating, and he described it a film in which well-dressed, reasonably thoughtful adults do and say grown-up things, as opposed to robots and Jedis and dinosaurs and stuff like that. I think what ultimately really soured me to the movie is, again, going back to what I liked about Ad Astra, are the ideas behind it. I mean, even something as kind of superficial and chatty and fun as this has an underlying ideology. And for this, it's this incredibly kind of repulsive conservative fantasy of allegiance to the monarchy, of allegiance to one's superiors, and friendship between people of different classes, that the relationship is in fact defined by professional obligation and servitude. It just, really did make me feel like the popcorn a little gross at the end of it, even though I really appreciated the joke, God is a monarchist because the weather's so nice. That was what the movie was actually saying based on the characters it was displaying, and that's just not for me.
I wouldn't say. First of all, I really like the series a lot. I didn't think this movie was as tightly written as really good episodes of the series were. I think that point's, already been kind of made. I was sort of charmed by the audience I was with. So this is a Monday night in Bloomfield, Connecticut, and this is 6:15 show, and there were, I think, maybe 40, 50 people in the theater, which is I go to that theater all the time, and there's 6 people in it or something. And most of them were women. There were some things that looked like maybe mother-daughter dates, adult daughter taking mom to the movie, speaking of Lucy's grandmother. They were having a really good time, too. I don't think the movie, for example, one of the things that this series is dependent on a lot is this frenemy relationship that is portrayed between the character played by Maggie Smith, the Dowager Countess, and Penelope Wilton, who's sort of the more liberal, progressive person seeing the future, same age group as the Dowager Countess. The Dowager Countess famously has just no connection to modernity. The biggest laugh she ever got in the series is when people were talking about the weekend, and she finally said, "What is a weekend?" Because basically every day is the same if you're really rich and pampered. But I didn't think the dialogue was as sharp this time as it could be in the series, but everybody was just laughing at every single thing the Dowager Countess ever said, except the one kind of grave thing she eventually says. But and they were happy, and it is a series. I don't know about the movie. In the series, I think women are subjects and men are objects. Women in the series tended to have discernible inner lives, motivations that were interesting. We see a lot of the world through the women. Lady Edith, Lady Mary, the Dowager Countess, Anna downstairs, Daisy downstairs. Whereas some of the men, I mean, Lord Grantham is kind of adult, and we just kind of see him. Carson is kind of an object. We just kind of see him. And Pedro, one of the things that I think the series has done really well, it's the reason it has that huge women fan base. I didn't think the movie did it quite well. As a matter of fact, Tom Branson, the Irish man who marries one of the noble sisters of the family, I think he's kind of got the pivotal role in this movie, which surprised me.
Yeah, that is surprising. I think that I think it's because his plot line was still kind of left unresolved, and so they had a lot to work with there. Versus, the women and the sisters have all kind of been settled to some degree. But I do think, actually, I saw it with my wife on a Monday at 10 a.m., and it was, I think mostly, it was a balanced audience, I think, but it was the same thing. Everyone was laughing and enjoying it very much.
All right, so we should say that shipped into this movie is Imelda Staunton, who's not in the series. She's a wonderful British actress. She happens to be married to the guy who plays Carson. Jim Carter is his name. So she's brought in as a new foe to face off Maggie Smith's Violet Crawley in very low stakes kinds of arguments about who's going to inherit money.
Even more money.
Even more money. Even more money. Exactly. Well put. And so Tuppence Middleton plays Lucy, this kind of awkward young woman who may be about to inherit a large fortune from Imelda Staunton. The Dowager Countess doesn't like this idea, so here's a little clip among the three of them.
How clever of you to find me. Well, not really. I lived here 40 years. I assume this is your maid?
Yes, this is Lucy Smith.
Oh, good evening, Smith.
Good evening, milady. Shall I go?
No, not for me. Not for me. I'm delighted to meet you. I've heard so much about you.
Is there something you want?
Oh, just to see you're comfortable. And to confirm our little chat for later.
I live my own life now, Violet. I'm not what I was. My father is gone, my husband is gone. I see no reason not to do what I want.
Well, that doesn't mean there is no reason. Merely that you cannot see it.
I think Lady Merton is right. We'll have it out once and for all. But now I must go to Her Majesty.
You know, Tom, one of the things that we sort of debated about as we were emailing about this is this kind of transference of TV to movies, movies back to TV. This particular thing, I think they just knew that there was a kind of a market for more. And as everybody has suggested, it wasn't necessary to concoct some huge, dramatic, fascinating life or death plotline. People just wanted to sit there and have this wash over them again. But it seems as though now we live in such a kind of continuous multi-platform world where stuff can be shifted around and played around and different characters harped on. So we go from Breaking Bad to Better Call Saul, but there's also a Breaking Bad movie that only has Jesse in it that's coming out pretty soon. It feels as though these things that are successful, they just kind of churn forever in different forms.
Yeah, and I had never seen an episode of Downton Abbey before watching this movie, and even though I think that made the plot and the 2 dozen or 3 dozen or 4 dozen characters all the more inscrutable, that didn't necessarily bother me. I think because we so rarely see movie adaptations of TV shows like this. I mean, the movie adaptations we see are, much not bigger budget, but kind of bigger explosions. I mean, they follow a kind of similar pattern of singular, bad men doing really bad things, or superheroes kind of blowing up the world or trying to save the world from getting blown up. And again, there's something kind of charming about the bizarre tonal equality of treating like the attempted assassination of the king and serving the king dinner with like the same level of stakes. But hey, if that was part of it seemed to be part of the charm of the show, and it's certainly part of the charm of the movie. I want to quickly say Maggie Smith, love. I mean, any movie with her in it, anything within her, she's so fun. She's such an incredible actress. The way she lingers on every single one of those lines. She's so playful and quiet. And I do think that you're quite astute in pointing out that men are objects and kind of butts of jokes. I want to single out one actor in this who I think got some very well-deserved laughs. Kevin Doyle, who plays this pretty peripheral character named Joseph Molesley, who's like one part in the movie is he speaks up out of turn at the dinner. And it actually, he has a really tense and really funny and humiliating moment. And there are a few moments that I imagine transfer well from the small screen to the big screen. But it is, yes, certainly a little baffling in terms of going into this completely blind.
I think also, maybe we could just take a minute or two to just talk about that. Pedro, you sort of, I think, kind of brought this up, that idea of moving stuff from TV to the movie screen. First of all, not everything transfers all that well, and you have to figure out like how you're going to do it. How you're going to. In this case, one of the things they had was a really big thing that people like to look at, which is the building.
Right. Yeah.
So you can have drones fly around and shoot it from every possible angle. But it's sort of an interesting question, like how much TV stuff is going to transfer. There's going to be Breaking Bad is now going to do just Rick Grimes movies with nobody else from Breaking Bad.
Walking Dead.
Yeah, Walking Dead. What did I say? Oh, I said Breaking Bad. Yeah. Walking Dead. I got my gerunds mixed up. But yeah, there's going to be a Breaking Bad movie, a Walking Dead movie. It is kind of interesting that now you just get these franchises that just. I assume there's going to be another Downton Abbey movie, right?
Yeah, it would be interesting to see if. They left it open. And you could have the King returning and have the same. Just do it again. So it'll be interesting to see if they just decide to do that one more time or not. But I do think it's interesting to see. Star Trek 50 years ago and 40 years ago moved from being a TV series and into being some films. And I think that it's happening now just more because we have these platforms which can kind of show film level quality stuff on these streaming platforms because they just have so much money. So like Disney's going to be doing, an Obi-Wan kind of 3-movie event type thing. Plus they're doing, and I think that you've just got, there's just so much desire for content that I think you're just going to start doing these spin-offs. How many, you just have HBO in terms of Game of Thrones. They're spinning off like 3 more series and movies. It's just getting kind of crazy.
By the way, did you notice that you're a Game of Thrones person, right?
Yeah, the books mostly. But,
okay, because Robert Baratheon in Downton Abbey is running the local store. He's a shopkeeper.
He's a very overzealous shopkeeper.
He's a very overzealous.
Yeah.
Well, one of the problems with this movie too, for I think us as people from a different country with a different kind of government, at least allegedly different kind of government, and for those of us who are Irish American too, and possibly Irish Republicans at heart. Everybody is just talk about stands. Everybody is so incredibly giddy about the presidents, and I think we're meant to see that as weird, but maybe we're not. I don't know. Maybe, but everybody from the shopkeeper to every member of the service. Mr. Molesley practically has to have oxygen administered to him at intervals because his head is spinning. And of course, one of the things we know about the royals is they're not that impressive. They just happen to be, they were born on third base, right? Mm-hmm.
But I think there's a very specific component of Downton Abbey where people really like. So it's 2 things. People like to escape, and people really like period pieces. It's the same reason people go into period rooms and really enjoy it in museums, and they listen to the harp music, and they linger, and they look at the couches with beautiful satin on them. And I think for that reason, I remember watching an episode of Downton Abbey with my grandmother, who now cannot walk. She's completely either in a wheelchair or in a recliner. And she said, "Wouldn't it be wonderful to be that rich?" and which is very funny because she's someone who kind of has like worked her way up on the social ladder. And so thinking about that and that fantasy that you get to escape into this really sumptuous world for an hour, or in the case of this movie, I don't know, 2 hours and change, something like that. Yeah, there is something like that. And Colin, when you were saying the best part of it may have been the audience, I think that was true for Tom and I too. That was delightful. Like if anyone's getting an Oscar from this movie, it is the collective audience that goes to and especially like the old biddies and moms and daughters. So I think, yes, there's a market for it. Absolutely.
All right. We should probably take a little break here though, so you'll have chances to do great endorsements when we get back. But this movie is called Downton Abbey, God is a Monarchist. I just gave it that subtitle.
Down with the king for years, about
Today's show was produced by... Hey, what's happening to Jonathan McPants? He's turning into Ed Asner. Oh my God! I'm turning into Ed Asner. Amanda Fish has a lot of spunk. I hate spunk. The part of Bill Curry was played by Mary Tyler Moore. On Monday, more impeachment coverage. And somehow we'll all stop being Ed Asner. It's this darned antimatter somebody left in the break room fridge. And now, back to Ed.
I wrote that just so I could make her do Ed Asner, and I'm glad I did. All right, so Tom, why don't you get us going with endorsements?
Okay, it's going to be a film nerd endorsement, so indulge me. I apologize. I've been watching a lot of entries in this series on the Criterion Channel, a streaming service put out by the Criterion Collection, which for decades has been publishing really high production value versions of classic and independent and foreign films. I've been watching this series called Observations on Film Art, hosted by two film historians, David Bortwell and Kim Thompson. And for anyone interested in the kind of the bare bones kind of film vocabulary and how it's realized and perfected by like the masters of cinema, it's awesome. It's so enlightening, and they come in these little 5-minute clips and then always associated with the movie on which the film historian is analyzing. You can watch right after it. And so particularly recommend one by David Bortwell on editing in Kurosawa films, and then the 1940s movie about jiu-jitsu called Senshiro Sugata. But in 5 minutes, it breaks down how Kurosawa uses editing to the extent that he does, and then you get to watch the whole movie and experience the wonder of like a truly gifted auteur. So Observations on Film Art on Criterion Channel.
All right, that was a very nerdy film endorsement. Lucy, how about you?
So I have two. The first, I've been thinking a lot about climate change and how we process information about climate change. And there is a group called CCTA, Climate Change Theater Action. And they've come out with 50 new plays. They're about 5-minute plays. Each of them are about 5 minutes this year. And they are basically having an open call. So if you are a person with a body who breathes air, you can perform one or any of these plays in a classroom, on a city green, on a street, whatever. And the whole idea is to spread information that isn't just gloom and doom. I also recommend things like The Uninhabitable Earth for that gloom and doom. And then the other thing, just Colin, because you replayed your episode on maternal mortality this week, which is one of my favorite episodes of the show, which I feel weird saying, is I just want to endorse nurse midwives for the work they do. They're super awesome, and you also can see a nurse midwife if you are not specifically a pregnant woman, and I do this, and I highly, highly recommend it. They're more thorough than gynecologists. And then the Missing Mothers Project, which is a joint project of ProPublica and NPR that's really, really good about maternal mortality.
All right. Thank you for all those endorsements, Lucy Gelman. Pedro, what have you got for us?
So on the Netflix, we have been watching at home the show Kim's Convenience. It came out, I think, last year, but it's Canadian. My sister is living in Toronto, and she suggested it to us because you see a lot of the city in it. But it's a small, cute bubblegum sitcom about an immigrant family from Korea who have a convenience store in Toronto, and their various hijinks ensue. And it's just a small 20-25 minute show. It's all about the immigrant experience and like the new generation of kids who grew up, and it feels, and I read this in a review, it does feel like it takes place in an alternate timeline where maybe we had a different electoral result in 2016, because it is happening in Canada, who's a lot more progressive on many things. And so the outlook just feels like, oh, I remember what that felt like. So it's just fun to watch for a whole bunch of reasons. But it's the cast is great. The father and the mom are just it's just hilarious. You'll blow through 3 seasons in a week or two. And
okay. So I want to just quickly, I should have done this at the top of the show, tell you that on October 25th on The Nose, we're going to talk about Stephen King's novel, The Institute. We don't do books very often, but Chris Grosso, Rich Holland, and Julia Pastel and I will all be reading The Institute and talking to you about that. So, if you want to join in somehow, you might want to get a copy. Also, if you want to get ready for next week, you should be watching Unbelievable on Netflix if you haven't already. It's very addictive series. I'm going to sort of medium endorse the Between Two Ferns movie, which has also been released onto Netflix. It's imperfect, and really the best parts of the movie are Zach Galifianakis just doing yet another and another and another Between Two Ferns interview. It starts out with a great Matthew McConaughey interview, but I don't know. I turned it on last night just to pass 20 minutes, and then I wound up watching the whole thing. So that says something. All right. Thanks very much to these wonderful guests here, Pedro Soto and Tom Breen and Lucy Gelman. Thanks to Jonathan McPants for getting it all together, and we'll be back on Monday.
The